They saw an old woman, frail and gray, clutching a rifle the color of a summer sky. The elite snipers, dressed in tactical shadow, laughed at the bright blue toy. They laughed, that is, until she lay down, aimed at an impossible distance, 4,000 meters, and quietly, decisively, made history. You have to understand, the High Desert Marksmanship Center in Utah is not a place for amateurs. It's where wind and distance conspire to break the egos of even the most seasoned professionals. The air is thin, the sun is a merciless white disk, and the mirage rising from the baked earth looks like water, a ghostly river separating the shooter from the target. On this particular Tuesday, the range was occupied by an elite military contract team. Their leader was a man named Joshua. Joshua was, to put it politely, confident. He was young, sharp, and carried the kind of arrogance that comes from being the best and knowing it. His gear was matte black, carbon fiber, and digital. His rifle, a .416 Barrett, looked less like a firearm and more like a piece of advanced artillery. He and his team were testing new ballistic software, pushing the boundaries of predictable, computer-aided shooting. They were hitting steel at 3,000 meters with relative ease, and the mood was light, full of technical jargon and backslapping. That's when the truck pulled up. It was an old, rattling Ford F-150, the kind of faded teal color you only see in sun-bleached states. It parked far down the line, away from the team's armored convoy. The driver's door opened, and she emerged, Martha. She looked, to Joshua's eyes, like someone's lost grandmother. She wore beige slacks, comfortable-looking sneakers, and a faded lavender cardigan despite the heat. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she moved with the slow, deliberate stiffness of aging joints. Joshua nudged his spotter, Mike. Would you look at that? I think the local nursing home is on a field trip. Mike chuckled, adjusting his high-powered spotting scope. Maybe she's here to birdwatch, Josh. The laughter died in their throats when Martha opened the truck's rusted toolbox and pulled out a long, hard case. It wasn't a standard Pelican case, it was old, leather-bound at the corners, and looked heavy. She laid it on the bench, her movements unhurried, and clicked open the latches. The team watched, intrigued, as she lifted it out. The rifle. It was the color that shocked them first. It was a bright, almost cheerful cerulean blue. The stock was a custom-molded piece of polished, vibrant blue laminate. It looked, against the drab browns and greens of the desert range, like a child's toy. Joshua burst out laughing. It wasn't a quiet chuckle. It was a loud, barking laugh that echoed across the firing line. A blue rifle? She's got a damn blueberry rifle. Martha, seemingly oblivious to the mockery, continued her setup. Martha laid a worn canvas mat on the ground. It was an old-style military mat, the kind you hadn't seen in active use since Vietnam, but it was pristine. She didn't have the high-tech adjustable bipods that Joshua's team used. Instead, she produced 2 heavy canvas bags filled with sand and began to build a nest for the rifle, patting the bags, shifting them, creating a perfect solid V. Joshua watched, his amusement turning to a sort of pitying fascination. Look at that. Sandbags. She's using sandbags. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Martha ignored him. She screwed a large, slightly dated-looking scope onto the rifle's receiver. The glass was clear, but the housing was brassed and worn at the adjustment knobs. She pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from her cardigan pocket, the one with the elastic band holding it shut, and a mechanical pencil. She clicked the pencil, her eyes scanning the range. The range master, an older man named Frank, who had been quietly observing, walked over to her. He had a look of deep respect on his face that confused Joshua. Good to see you, Martha. What are you feeling today? Martha looked up. Her eyes, magnified by her spectacles, were the color of faded denim. They were clear and sharp. Hello, Frank. It's a fast day. The air feels thin. I think I'd like to try the impossible target. Frank's bushy eyebrows shot up. The impossible target was a new addition, a 4,000-meter steel plate set on the furthest ridge. It was mostly a marketing gimmick. No one had ever actually hit it. 4,000, Frank whispered, leaning in. Martha, the Coriolis effect alone at that range. I know, she said, her voice quiet but not weak. I'd like to try. Joshua overheard this, the impossible target. He strode over, his tactical boots crunching on the gravel. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you aware that this range is for professionals? We're conducting military-grade tests here." Martha turned to look at him. She looked him up and down, from his digital camo cap to his expensive boots. "Are you?" she asked. Joshua was taken aback. "We're testing ballistic computers against, he waved at the distant mountains. Real-world conditions. Hitting 4,000 meters isn't just hard. It's a mathematical equation that the wind loves to mess up. You can't just wing it." Martha gave him the smallest hint of a smile. "A computer is only as good as the data you feed it, young man. And no computer can feel the thermal shift off that shale rock at 2,000 meters. She pointed. Joshua looked. He saw nothing but heat mirage. "Right," he scoffed. "Well, don't let us stop you. We're about to try 3,500. Feel free to, watch how it's done. Now, you have to understand. Hitting a target at 3,500 meters is not like shooting at a normal range. The bullet, a massive .416 projectile, would be in the air for over 7 seconds. In that time, the rotation of the Earth would physically move the target. The wind, which might be blowing left to right at the firing line, could be blowing right to left a mile down range. It was, as Joshua said, a complex equation. Joshua and Mike, his spotter, became a seamless machine. "All right, Kestrel reads 4 knots, full value LR, Mike said, his eye pressed to the spotting scope. Humidity 12%. Baro 2992. Coriolis is 1.8 MOA left. Joshua typed the data into his ballistic computer, a ruggedized tablet mounted next to his rifle. The screen glowed, showing him the solution. Board says 42.5 mils elevation, 2.8 mils left windage. Joshua confirmed. He adjusted his enormous scope, the clicks loud and precise. He lay behind the massive black rifle, settled his breathing, and looked through the scope. "Sending," he said. He squeezed the trigger. The boom was a physical concussion, a punch to the chest that kicked up a cloud of dust around him. They waited. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds. Thwack. The sound, faint as a snapped twig, came back. Mike hissed. "Splash! 2 meters low, 1 meter right. That's a miss." Wind must have shifted past the second ridge. Joshua cursed, but quietly. He was a professional. "Damn it, that mirage is boiling. Okay, recalculate. Add 0.5 mil elevation. Adjust wind to 3.1. He fired again. Boom, another long wait. Ping. "Hit," Mike yelled. "Good hit. Just left of center." Joshua allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk. He had put steel on target at 3,500 meters on his second shot. It was an impressive feat. He got up, stretching, and glanced down the line at Martha. She was still there, quietly arranging her sandbags. She hadn't even chambered around yet. She was just watching. She was watching the wind, not with a digital meter, but with her eyes. She was watching the way the heat haze shimmered, the way the tiny, distant bushes swayed. She had taken a small silk ribbon, the kind you'd see on a gift, and tied it to the end of her rifle barrel. It fluttered, then went still, then fluttered again. Joshua shook his head. "She's using a ribbon," he muttered to Mike, and they shared another laugh. This was going to be pathetic. Martha finally seemed satisfied with her setup. The blue rifle sat in its sandbag nest, perfectly immobile. She lay down on the canvas mat, her movements slow but precise. She didn't wince, she didn't groan. She simply folded herself into the prone position, as if she had done it every day for 50 years. She pulled the leather-bound notebook and her pencil. She did not look at the 4,000-meter target. Not yet. She stared at the space between. She looked at the slope of the land, the color of the dirt. She wrote a small note. Ground heat rising. She looked at the clouds, thin and wispy, miles high. Upper atmosphere stable, jet stream minimal. She squinted at the trees on a ridge about halfway to the target. Leaves turning north. Wind is pushing back. Joshua, bored now, watched her through his binoculars. He was zoomed in on her notebook, trying to see what secret data she was writing. It wasn't math, it was words, descriptions. Wind feels cool on the left cheek. Mirage is running right to left, not boiling, sun angle high. It was, he thought, utter nonsense. It was poetry, not ballistics. This is priceless, he said. She's writing a diary. Martha, meanwhile, was doing her own math. But her math was in her head. It was a complex library of experiences. She was remembering a shot in a humid jungle, a cold shot in a snowy valley. She was recalling the way a bullet drops when the air is dry. She knew the 4,000-meter shot was 2.48 miles. She knew her hand-loaded .375 Chaytak round would be in the air for almost 13 seconds. She knew the bullet would climb to an apex of over 250 feet, like a miniature mortar, before it began its long, fatal drop. She knew the earth would spin underneath it. She knew all this, not because a computer told her, but because she had spent a lifetime learning the language of the wind. She finally opened the bolt of her rifle. The action was smooth, gliding with a well-oiled shing. She pulled a single round from a small wooden box. The brass was polished like gold. It was a round she had loaded herself, that very morning, measuring the powder to the single grain. She chambered it, the click of the bolt locking into place sounding unnervingly final. Let's talk about that rifle. Joshua saw a blue toy. What he failed to see was the craftsmanship. The rifle wasn't painted. The stock was made of countless layers of wood laminate, dyed cerulean blue and dark gray, then compressed under thousands of pounds of pressure and carved by hand to fit a specific shoulder, her shoulder. The barrel was a heavy, fluted 36-inch Krieger, one of the most accurate barrels in the world. The action was a custom-made stiller, worn smooth from decades of use. The scope, while it looked old, was a vintage Schmidt & Bender PM2, a piece of glass so clear and powerful that modern scopes still struggled to match its resolution. That blue rifle was a custom-built instrument, and it was priceless. It was an extension of Martha herself. Why blue? Frank, the rangemaster, knew. He'd known Martha for 30 years. Her late husband, a spotter she'd met in the service, had loved the color. He always said the military spent too much time hiding in drab colors. One day, Martha, he'd said, you should build a rifle so beautiful and bright that it honors the skill you have instead of just the job you do. When he passed, she built the rifle. It was a tribute, a memory. It was also a statement. It was a statement that skill doesn't need to hide behind camouflage. Skill, true skill, can be bright blue and still be deadly. Martha settled her cheek against the polished blue stock. It was cool against her skin. She looked through the scope. The 4,000-meter target was a tiny white rectangle, barely visible through the shimmering heat. It looked a mile away, because it was 2.5. Joshua, seeing her finally get into position, announced to his team, "All right, quiet on the line. Let's give the lady some concentration. She's going for the 4K. His voice was loud, sarcastic. He was setting her up to fail publicly. This I gotta see. He and Mike trained their high-powered spotting scope on the 4,000-meter target, ready to call the miss. They expected to see a puff of dust 1,000 yards short or 100 yards wide. This was going to be a laugh. Martha just breathed, in and out. Martha did not aim at the impossible target. Not yet. That would be foolish. She needed to read the wind, to get a letter from the downrange conditions. She traversed the rifle, her movements economical, and aimed at a large, sun-bleached rock formation she estimated was about 1,500 meters away. She's not even aiming at the target, Mike whispered, confused. What is she doing? Sighting in her toy scope, probably. Joshua sneered. Martha adjusted her focus. She held her breath for just a second, her crosshairs steady on a small, dark patch on the rock. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was different from Joshua's. His was a thudding boom. Hers was a sharp, high-velocity snap like a massive whip breaking the sound barrier. They watched. 1 second, 2. Thwack. A tiny puff of white dust erupted from the exact dark patch she had been aiming at. Mike, glued to his spotter scope, forgot to be quiet. Hit. Holy, that was a dead center hit. 1,500 meters. Cold bore. A cold bore shot, the first shot from a clean, cool barrel, is the hardest shot to make, as the barrel harmonics are not yet settled by heat. Joshua's face tightened. That wasn't a lucky shot. A 500-meter cold-bore hit was professional, extremely professional. Fine, Joshua muttered. So she can shoot. 1/500 is not 4,000. That's a different solar system. Martha worked her rifle's bolt, ejecting the spent casing, which spun through the air and landed neatly on her mat. She didn't look at it. She was looking through her scope, watching the trace of the bullet's vapor trail, visible only to a highly trained eye. She watched it curve in the wind. She saw the mirage boil just before the rock, indicating an updraft. She picked up her pencil. She wrote in her notebook, "Wind hold was 1.2 mils. Bullet rose at 1,300 thermal lift." She nodded to herself. She had the data she needed. Now, and only now, she turned her attention to the impossible target. She began to twist the elevation knob on her scope, and twist, and twist. The clicks were quiet, but audible. Joshua counted them. 10, 20, 30. My God, he whispered. She's dialing 60 mils of elevation. The computer only called for 42 for my round. But Martha's 375 round was different. It was heavier, slower, perhaps. She knew its exact behavior. She was dialing an elevation that would, in essence, point the rifle at the sky. She was lobbing a 350-grain bullet in a massive arc. Then she did something that made Joshua's brain itch. She didn't dial the windage knob, not a single click. Joshua's team, with their advanced computers, had calculated a 2.8 mil wind hold. The wind was clearly blowing left to right, but Martha's windage knob remained at 0. "She's not holding for wind," Mike said, his voice filled with disbelief. "She's going to miss by a football field. Is she crazy?" "Just watch," Joshua said. His voice had lost its mocking tone. It was just tense. Martha settled back into the rifle, her cheek firmly on the blue stock. She took a deep breath. She looked through the scope, and then she aimed, but she wasn't aiming at the target. Through his own binoculars, Joshua could see her crosshairs. She was aiming high and far, far to the left of the target. She was aiming at a patch of empty blue sky, a full 4 miles left of the steel plate. "What is she doing?" Mike asked. "She's holding into the wind, but the wind is coming from the left. She should be holding right. She's holding twice as much in the wrong direction." Joshua didn't speak. He was watching Martha's face. Her eyes were calm. Her breathing was steady. She was seeing something they weren't. She was accounting for something their multi-thousand-dollar computers had missed. She was playing a different game. She was aiming at a point in the sky where she knew the target would be when the wind, the spindrift, and the Coriolis effect had all finished their violent, invisible argument with her bullet. 13 seconds from now. Time seemed to slow down. The desert went quiet. The other snipers on Joshua's team had all stopped what they were doing. They were all standing, binoculars raised, watching the old woman with the blue rifle. They were about to witness either the most embarrassing failure on the range's history or a miracle. Martha let out half a breath, finding the natural respiratory pause. Her finger rested on the trigger. She wasn't tensing for the recoil. She was part of the rifle. The rifle was part of the earth. She saw the mirage flicker. She saw the silk ribbon on her barrel go perfectly still for 1 split second. The air was in a momentary lull. Now. She didn't pull the trigger. She pressed it. She applied pressure until the sear broke, surprising even herself. The crack snapped across the valley. The rifle bucked, but she rode the recoil, her body absorbing it, her eye never leaving the scope, fighting to see the trace. The huge muzzle brake blasted a V-shaped cloud of dust out to her sides, and then the wait began. It was an agonizing, silent eternity. Everyone was counting. 1, 2, 3. The bullet was climbing, reaching its apex, high above the valley floor. 4, 5, 6. It was passing the 2,000-meter mark, entering the zone of thermal updrafts that Martha had noted. 7, 8, 9. The bullet was beginning its plunge, screaming downward at transonic speeds. The spin of the earth was nudging it right. The wind was pushing it right. 10. 11. Joshua was holding his breath. He was staring at the target. Nothing. "Miss," he breathed, almost disappointed. 12. 13. A tiny red light on the target's sensor base flickered. Once. It was the signal. Hit. Before their brains could even process the light, the sound reached them. A faint, pure, metallic clang. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. A perfect 4,000 meters center mass hit. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind, which suddenly seemed incredibly loud. Mike lowered his spotting scope, his mouth open. I don't. Joshua was frozen, his binoculars still pointed at the distant steel. He had just watched a ghost shoot a bullet 2.5 miles and hit a target he had deemed impossible. He lowered his binoculars slowly. His face was pale. The arrogance, the confidence, the swagger, it had all evaporated, blown away by the sonic boom of that single shot. All that was left was raw, unfiltered, staggering awe. He looked down the line. Martha was already pulling her bolt back, the spent, smoking casing ejected and landed on her mat. She didn't cheer, she didn't smirk, she didn't even look up to see their reactions. She simply began her post-shooting ritual. She took a cleaning rod from her case, methodically pushed a patch through the barrel, and began to wipe down her rifle. She was treating it like any other day, any other shot. It was this more than the shot itself that broke Joshua, the casual professionalism of it. It was a shot that would make headlines in the firearms world, a shot that would be debated in forums for years, and she was treating it like she was washing dishes after dinner. The rest of his team was silent, their faces a mixture of confusion and reverence. They looked at their own high-tech equipment, their digital readouts and carbon fiber stocks, and it all suddenly looked cheap. It looked like toys. The blue rifle was the only real weapon on the line. Joshua, his legs feeling heavy, began to walk toward her. He felt like a child approaching a king. He didn't know what he was going to say. How? Who are you? He just knew he had to go. Joshua stopped about 5 feet from her mat. Martha continued to wipe down her scope lens, her back mostly to him. Ma'am? Joshua's voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, that shot is impossible. Martha paused her cleaning. She turned, sitting on her heels, and looked up at him. Her faded blue eyes were kind, but they held an ocean of experience. Impossible, she said, her voice mild, is just a word for something you haven't learned how to do yet. But the wind, Joshua protested. Our computers, we were holding 2.8 mils right. You held 4 mils left. You held against the wind. How? Martha pointed with a cloth-covered finger. Your computer, she said, read the wind here. And it read the wind at the target. It didn't read the wind at 2,500 meters where the valley narrows. The wind hits that rock face. She pointed to a distant geological feature. And it creates a vortex. It spins. The air at your level goes right, but up high, where your bullet spends most of its time, it's going left. Hard. She tapped her old notebook. Your machine calculates. It doesn't see. Joshua was speechless. He had been so focused on the data, he had forgotten to read the world. Just then, Frank, the rangemaster, walked up, holding 2 bottles of cold water. He handed one to Martha. Brilliant shot, Martha. New range record, not that you care. He turned and offered the other to Joshua, who took it numbly. You look like you've seen a ghost, son, Frank said, a twinkle in his eye. I don't understand, Joshua said, looking at Martha. Who are you? Frank chuckled. This, Joshua, is Martha Cerulean Kincaid. She was a ghost instructor at Quantico in the 70s. She taught the men who taught the men who taught your instructors. She wrote the original doctrine on high-angle shooting and wind estimation. Joshua's blood ran cold. He was standing in front of a living legend. The blue rifle, he whispered. A dare, Frank said. Someone told her back in '85 that a pretty gun couldn't be a serious tool. So she built this, and she's been proving them wrong ever since. Martha snapped her leather case shut. The blue rifle was put away. She stood up slowly, her knees cracking. You're a good shot, young man, she said to Joshua. You're fast with your technology, but you let it do your thinking for you. Sometimes, you just need to feel the air on your cheek. She nodded to Frank, and then began to walk back to her old truck. Joshua and his entire team just stood and watched her go. They didn't speak until the sound of the F-150's engine had faded into the desert heat. The mockery was gone. All that remained was a deep, silent, and profound respect.